welcome to the Sports Science Dudes. I am your host, Dr. Jose Antonio, with my fearless co-host, Dr. Anthony Ricci. Did you know Dr. Ricci, he formerly hailed out of the People's Republic of New York. Now he finds himself in the great state of Florida. If this is your first time listening, hit the like button and subscribe to the show. We'll cover all things related to sports science and nutrition, even a little bit of sports neuroscience. But if you want to email us with any suggestions for guests or topics, our email is sportsciencedudes@gmail.com. That's sportsciencedudes@gmail.com. It's kind of a spelling bee, so don't misspell it if you're gonna email us. Now, our guest today is Dr. Jaime Tartar. A little bit about her. She earned her PhD at that school next to Florida State University, aka University of Florida. She also, get this, Tony, she completed a postdoc at the university that is the competitor to Yale.
Yes, she did.
Yes, she did. Harvard, yeah.
That would be Harvard, yep.
She studied the neurobiology of sleep and earned a certificate in sleep medicine from the Division of Sleep Medicine, so she's an expert on sleeping. Her research interests are focused on the mechanisms and consequences of acute and chronic stress in humans and the impact of normal sleep and sleep deprivation. However, recently, she has ventured into where all the cool people hang out, exercise science people, So she and I are co-founders of the Society for Neurosports, and she will tell you a little bit about that, which, by the way, our 4th annual conference is February 17 and 18 at Deerfield Beach, Florida. To register for this awesome event, go to neurosports.net. That is neurosports.net. And despite all of the technical difficulties, we'd like to welcome Dr. Jaime Tartar to the show.
Hello, thanks for having me. But you said you were going to delete the technical difficulties.
You know what? I may or may not add it to it. So, hopefully, hopefully I covered
the technical difficulty.
I like the shark in your background, by the way. It's kind of
Thank you. And I have a gator for Go Gators.
Oh, go Gators! Wow. Yeah. Broad question. You're actually, one of our first introductions had to do with me asking you to write an article on cortisol.
Yes.
And in the exercise and sports science field, there seems to be a lot of odd positions taken on cortisol. Too much is bad. It might make you fat, yada, yada, yada. So the question is this: what should in terms of cortisol levels in your blood, morning, midday, and night, what is the normal pattern? And are there ways to make it better? I know it's a broad question, but tackle that.
A broad kind of lady, so that's fine. All right. So with cortisol, we had talked about this idea that cortisol kind of gets a bad reputation because people think like, oh, cortisol is a stress hormone. So if I release cortisol, I'm super stressed, which is just absolutely not true, right? It's an essential hormone in your body. If you didn't need it, you wouldn't have it, right? And so you and I, we love taking evolutionary perspectives, right? So with this idea that humans have been around for 300,000 years, cortisol has been doing what it needs to do, and humans and other animals, specifically in humans, for about 300,000 years. It doesn't do what it's supposed to do incorrectly, right? The only time that we really need to worry about cortisol is when we live in modern times and there's some evolutionary mismatches where we have a lot of people around us. People tend to be really psychologically stressful. So, that can interfere a little bit with cortisol, but for the most part, it's not really a hormone that you need to worry too much about. There's some sort of silly research out there that hasn't been replicated that, if you stand in a certain position, you can change your cortisol levels, but that's sort of silly. It's homeostatically regulated. For the most part, it's doing what it needs to do. Cortisol levels go up when they need to go up. When you need energy, they go down through negative feedback loops. Cortisol levels don't stay high, even if they go up a little bit when there's not dysregulation. And as far as that, you sent me something the other day that wasn't quite accurate from somebody else. Everything you say is accurate.
Of course. Well, let me ask you that. Okay, no, I know, just so the audience can follow the story. So for people who exercise, right, they get up in the morning, and is there a way to, and I hate the word optimize because people in our field use it a lot. Is there a way to optimize cortisol levels based on what you do in the morning, midday, or afternoon? Or it's fine, there's only so much you could do to, I guess, optimize it.
Yeah, the reality is biology is boring, right? The biology, the way it exists, there's not really a lot of super sexy things that you can do. Cortisol levels are high in the morning, and they're supposed to be high in the morning because waking up is stressful. You need a lot of energy to do all these sort of morning things. So before you even wake up, you get that cortisol, peak cortisol levels in the morning. And you should. Cortisol levels for everybody should be high in the morning. And that's cortisol awakening response is actually a measure that we take to see, for example, people who are depressed don't necessarily have a cortisol awakening response. People who have circadian misalignment don't have a cortisol awakening response. So for all of us, we do want cortisol levels to be high in the morning. And then as the day goes on, those levels should reach their nadir levels, like towards the end of the day. But most hormone systems in our body follow this kind of like circadian rhythmicity, right? And the timing of when hormones are released and why they're released really just depends on the needs of that particular organism. So for example, in rats, they have corticosterone. So their cortisol levels are highest during their nighttime, which is our daytime. So hormones and different hormones that are released in our body are high at the times of the day when we need them to be high because of the needs of us as a specific species.
So does it matter? Sorry, Tony, I'm like hogging this conversation.
I don't blame you because it's just great
Does it
information.
matter? Does it matter though if you work out in the morning or the evening vis-a-vis cortisol?
Not really, because as we've shown in our own research, is that cortisol doesn't really move that much when we exercise. Again, cortisol is tightly and homeostatically regulated. When we bring people into my lab, we get the biggest cortisol responses from giving people psychological stress, right? So cortisol is very sensitive to psychological evaluation and social evaluation. It's not as responsive to physical stress. So epinephrine is much more responsive to physical stress. So for example, you and I, we ran people on treadmill, max heart rate, and we didn't really move cortisol. It kind of stayed the same. If anything, they came in with a little bit higher cortisol because they were anticipating the stress of being in a new environment, but epinephrine will go up. So cortisol with exercise, I wouldn't worry too much about how your cortisol levels are changing with physical exercise.
And then, Dr. J, what's the half-life? I mean, obviously the catecholamines are shorter, right? Assuming that we are being, to your point, it's more toward the evening and you're feeling that psychological evaluation, if you will. Now, is that surge potentially comparable first to what we would have released in the morning in our regular circadian rhythm? And if it were to be somewhat comparable, then how long is the hormone staying around? Is that contingent upon how long we might feel that psychological stress as an example, or what's the time we can expect it to be around and have an impact under those circumstances?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, Tony. So because when we have a fight or flight response, we know epinephrine comes really fast because our heart rate starts beating fast and our pupils dilate and we get red in the face. Cortisol is a little bit of a different monster. When we do bring people in the lab and we give them psychological stress, it takes, we don't really even see cortisol levels rising for about 10 minutes. Right? Because you have a CRH from the hypothalamus, ACTH from the pituitary, and then it's got to govern cortisol release. And peak levels, about 30 minutes after the stressor is really when we see those peak levels. But luckily, just like most hormone systems in your body, there's a very exquisite and sensitive negative feedback loop. So about an hour after that, the cortisol will start to bind to different areas of, it'll bind to the hypothalamus, it'll bind to the pituitary, but most importantly for us, one of the areas of the brain responsible for shutting down cortisol, for doing that negative feedback, is the hippocampus. Okay. So hippocampus is an area of your brain that's really important for like learning and memory and retrieving those memories. So that's why sometimes if you feel like really overwhelmingly stressed, someone could be like, Tony, what's your middle name? And you're like, I don't remember, I'm so stressed. Because the part of your brain that you need to get those memories is like, I'm dealing with cortisol right now.
Yep.
But it will. And most of us, even when we feel stressed, cortisol does what it's supposed to do. And that negative feedback regulation kicks in and it's going to stop the further release of cortisol. It's people who get into trouble with this are people who, really, when we look at people who have depression, for example, we don't see that normal circadian rhythmicity. And we don't see like normal cortisol responses. And most of us that don't have, psychological pathology, it's doing what it needs to do.
Okay, got it.
Interesting. Can we switch topics? I want to talk to you about sleep because we know sleep is important for athletic athletic performance.
Mhm.
Sort of the first question, looking more at the basic biology of sleep and how it, for lack of a better term, how does it clean the brain? Because a lot of people, there's a lot of people who feel like they are tough by not sleeping. They're like, oh, I got 4 hours of sleep last night and I'm working my ass off. But explain the physiology of how the brain cleans itself with sleep.
Yeah, that's stupid. It's stupid to brag about. Not sleeping is like bragging about not brushing your teeth, right? You're like, oh, I haven't brushed my teeth for 3 weeks. I'm super busy. So a lot of the people that are your listeners, I think, are really interested in physical fitness too, right? So
Yeah.
I can sell sleep right away and tell you that the longer you sleep, the more testosterone you release, because testosterone is preferentially released during sleep.
I need to sleep a
So
lot.
from 4 to 8 hours, you can double the amount of testosterone, which is like,
Wow. Look at those biceps.
yeah, I sleep 8 hours a night.
But you know what? The Victoria Burgess, she did her study on exercise in the morning or exercise in the evening and how it affected sleep. But so exercise itself doesn't seem to impact sleep duration. So when people say, well, I'm only getting 6 hours of sleep, what do you tell them? Because I always say, well, if you exercise, you'll sleep better, but that's not always true.
You might sleep
So-
more deeply.
So you got to sleep more deeply?
You usually, because when you exercise, you do release some cytokines like interleukin-1 beta, and that can promote sleep. That's also the cytokine that makes us sleep when we're sick. So it can actually promote deeper sleep, a more restful sleep. So for her study, it didn't matter if you exercise in the morning or if you exercise at night, because the idea, some people say, like, don't exercise at night, you're going to interfere with your sleep. It turns out it doesn't matter. Like, exercise when you want. But exercising in general is a great way to have better quality sleep that night, like deeper sleep.
So I just a quick, so one thing, and I wholeheartedly agree with you on the sleep side. There are a lot of people that are rationalize from an evolutionary biology perspective. We probably were not able to sleep 8 sound hours, right? Years ago or thousands of years ago, because of a host of different factors. And from an athletic performance standpoint, it makes zero sense not to get that 8 hours, right? I always say to people, don't tempt physiology. Okay, do not tempt it. Try to, forgive me for using the word Joey hates. Don't tempt phys, optimize it. But my question is, are we in a better position, I think, Dr. J, now in society where it seems like it's easier to get that 8 or 9 hours from a perspective of safety, a roof over your head, the better resources. I'm assuming, 200,000 years ago, you didn't get probably 8 or 9 hours of sound sleep due to a host of, or a variety of factors. Now, based upon where we are, though, take advantage of that unequivocally, of that 8 or 9, because we have the ability to do it much more consistently. That's hands down, correct?
Yeah, and well, it is important to sleep 8 hours, to Jose's earlier point that when you sleep, lots of important things happen when you sleep. But one of the most important things that happens is that your brain is literally cleaning itself, right? Your brain is metabolically very active. About 20% of our metabolic activity goes directly towards our brain. Brain doesn't have a way of cleaning out all those toxic proteins that build up during the day. So the only time your brain really has a chance to clean itself and get rid of all that metabolic waste is when it's doing nothing else, right? In deep sleep. So there's a brand new system that literally, this research just came out. It looks like some of the arachnoid matter does a pretty good job of that through some of these glial cells in our brain. They have special aquaporin channels. And during sleep, the matter, the tissue in your brain shrinks a little bit, and you can exchange cerebrospinal fluid with the fluid in your brain, right? And that's a great way of cleaning out. That's the only time your brain has of cleaning itself out, the interstitial fluid and cerebrospinal fluid exchange during sleep. Wow. And that's why we do see people who have a lifetime of poor sleep are at risk for neurodegenerative diseases, because some of those toxic proteins are beta amyloid, proteins associated with Alzheimer's disease, alpha-synuclein associated with Parkinson's. So it's really important. And I would tell people that say, that I actually think it's not true, because when we look at hunter-gatherer populations, which is a lens into what the natural human condition should be like, they don't have insomnia. They're sleeping just fine, right? And they're getting 7.5 hours of sleep. So if you didn't need 8 hours of sleep, you wouldn't do it. Because if you think about the fact that what's not happening when you're sleeping, like you're not foraging, you're extremely vulnerable, right? You're vulnerable to predation. You're not having sex, right? You're not doing any of the things that are really fun for your species.
Yep.
And when we leave humans alone in research settings and let them just sleep kind of ad lib, people sleep 8 hours, right? And if you like anything in evolution, if you didn't absolutely, I mean, that's really the minimum you need to do all the healthy things that your body and brain need to do. And so for modern humans, we screw up because for us, the biggest mistake that we're making is just exposure to light, right? So light, we need that bright light, natural sunlight in the morning to regulate, it doesn't cause the release of cortisol, but there's not, not like one bolus of cortisol that's released in the morning, like I heard yesterday, but
you heard that one. All right, got it.
It helps to set the circadian rhythm for lots of these hormones. So
Wait,
getting that morning light and not light at night is one of the best things we can do.
So it's mere exposure to sunlight in the morning that does what exactly?
It basically, so in your retina, you have these really stupid cells, like they're really dumb.
Are they called the stupid cells?
They're called intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglions.
I like stupid cells better.
But they're stupid. All they know is there's short wavelength light or there's not. And that's all they do. And it's like bright short, like 10,000 lux. And if they sense that, then they tell the hypothalamus, this clocking hypothalamus, bruh, it's morning. Set all the hormone systems to it's morning. And then when there's not light, the cells are like, oh, there's no light, release melatonin and all those hormones. That's how you get circadian misalignment, is that when you don't have that sort of those natural light and dark cues, you can get thrown, your hormone systems can get thrown off.
So what happens if you live in like a crappy state like Ohio where you don't see sun in the winter?
Well, I live in I work in a crappy building. I work in a science building. And as you know, science buildings are really sad. And,
but you can walk outside and see sun.
Well, I don't have to, because if you can't get your own sunlight, look at here. Store-bought is fine.
Wow. You do live in the Sunshine State. You know that, right?
This is what I work in a science building. So on those mornings when I come to work and I haven't been outside, I just turn, because the cells are stupid. They're not like, oh, that's not the sun. They just go, oh, it's like 480 nanometers, 10,000 lux. Let's go.
Okay.
Yeah, go on. I have one more question. And first, to those of folks in Ohio, I love Ohio. Dr. A may not like it, but I love Ohio. I'm a Buckeyes fan too, by the way. Go Buck. One more question too pertaining to sleep, if that's okay. Something that's really important, you and I have discussed a lot, Dr. Jaime, and to the athletes out there, right, that are practicing complex motor skills. I think sleep becomes particularly important because this is when those skills or the neurons or the patterns, right, are really being created and reinforced during rest. So to a large extent, I know this isn't a correct statement, but just for the purpose of bringing a point across, we're kind of learning when we're sleeping. Am I right? In a way?
You consolidate. New memories are consolidated during sleep.
Okay. So if I learn a new skill or a different way to throw a punch, as an example, that rest obviously is going to help augment that skill down the road, or even like quite rapidly, as a matter of fact, maybe within a couple of days of application. So everybody, sleep. If you're in sporting activity, you're doing complex motor skills, you have to learn new skills to win, to make money. Please take advantage of the 8 hours in order to do that.
Sleep is training. There's just no way around it.
Got it.
Okay, how about this? Two very pragmatic questions related to sleep. The effects of alcohol on sleep, i.e. wine or beer, and the effects of marijuana, people love smoking that stuff down here in Florida, on sleep. So tell us first about the effects of wine.
All right, well, I have to say up front that I do have a glass of wine at night. I have a French husband, so it's how I say.
Okay. I'm glad you disclosed that. Conflict of interest.
Well, because I think it's important, you know, especially when we're, you know, as a person who's an expert in nutrition, it's important, I think, to let people know the truth, right? Maybe you have a cheeseburger once in a while. We're not perfect, right? I do everything I can to get great sleep, but that's my Achilles heel is I do have some wine at night. And I know it's not great for my sleep. I've made that. I've made that piece. So with alcohol, it works. Most medications, most things on the market right now that put you to sleep well, do so through modulating GABA, right? If you increase GABA, you shut down your brain. So you stop your brain cells from firing, or you slow down the firing. So anti-anxiety drugs work this way, right? They increase GABA and they slow down firing rates. Alcohol works this way too. Most sleeping pills work this way. So all of these drugs work through different mechanisms through which they all increase GABA, right? So if you increase GABA in someone's brain, they're going to go to sleep. They're going to go down, or they're going to be relaxed, right? Different variations of going down. And it will put you to sleep. Alcohol is sort of a somnogen. It will make you feel sleepy. It will change the architecture of your sleep though. So you won't get as good quality of sleep that you would have gotten. So even though it sometimes people, you know, they drink and they get sleepy and they go to sleep, it's not really good for your sleep overall.
So does it affect sleep duration, sleep?
It can affect sleep depth, because when you go to sleep, when you first go to sleep, you want to go into get to deep sleep pretty quickly, go through light sleep and deep sleep, and then go back to light to REM to light to deep. But in the first part of the night, you kind of want to hang out longer in deep sleep to clean the brain and all those things. And in REM sleep, you got to work through your emotion processing. And all of these things matter. This is what we talk about as sleep architecture. And that alcohol can influence the architecture of sleep. So it's not the same way it would have been without it. So it's not a great idea to drink before bed, kids.
Nice. And I'm sure it's got to be dose dependent too. I mean, 1 glass is okay. 5 glasses, maybe not the best. I mean,
yeah,
you know.
It's how we do most things. Like if 1 is good, 20 is better, right?
Well, what is there data on marijuana smoking and sleep?
Yeah, with CBD, there's more data on CBD.
CBD.
And it's a little all over the place, unfortunately. I don't think there's one clear answer. And I think it's because it's not always the same, like you said, it's not always the same dose, it's not always the same product. Study variations are different. A lot of, like, my suspicion is CBD does what a lot of non-GABAergic promoting sleep medication does, is it calms your nervous system. Because the other set of nutritional supplements that are on the market to help sleep do so by calming your nervous system. Because the biggest problem, not you, because of who you are, Jose, but for us, the rest of us that experience anxiety, like the biggest problem with most of us going to bed is we have anxiety. I mean, lay in bed at night, like thinking all your problems and thinking about your kids and all your Neurosports conferences coming up. So if you can decrease anxiety, you can usually increase sleep.
Speaking of Neurosports, I think Tony had a question about the conference coming up, or sports neuroscience.
Yeah, well, I just want to make sure, once again, we are talking the 16th, 17th, am I correct, or February?
17th and 18th.
17th and 18th, this February, everyone, a must. This is the first organization making a concerted effort to couple, or I should say marry a host of different disciplines, right? We're talking sports psychology, neuroscience, mental skills training, and even exercise science. So one thing I'd like perhaps, and you've given me this before, Dr. J, a wonderful definition of an emerging field, everyone, and one that I'm in love with, and one that you both teach a class in, the field of sport neuroscience, right? And the integration of all the different disciplines that I just said. But a lot of times I've been asked consistently, what is sport neuro? What does it even mean? So can you share what your vision of, your definition of it is, and potentially, you know, what the vision for that field might be?
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's a little convoluted, not the concise definition I gave you, but I think it's part of the reason why we all became friends and why we all started talking to each other is as a neuroscientist and in the field of neuroscience, it's become very clear in the last decade that if you want to have a healthy brain, you absolutely need to have a moving body, that the peripheral factors that are released when you exercise help your brain, right? We've talked about, osteocalcin and BDNF and IL-6 and all of these things promote brain health. And there's some neuroscientists that would even take the stand that we have brains because we're organisms that move, right? This is the point of a brain. And just sort of understanding now how exercise can help with things like depression, right? And how exercise can help with things like neurodegenerative diseases. Exercise is being used to, I think, promote lots of different, medical and psychological issues. And on the sort of flip side of that, from the exercise science side, I think that there is maybe to my mind, maybe a newer appreciation that you can have the king of protein, right? You can have all the protein that you want, drink all the water that you want. But if you're not doing the things that like we're talking about today, like that appreciation for what happens in the brain, the appreciation for sleep, right? How do motor networks change when you have anxiety? And can you work on those motor networks, during anxiety? So it's basically like, these basic psychological processes that happen in the brain affect sport performance too.
Absolutely. Yep.
So I think we have to, and just in academia, most of your audience who aren't in academia may not know, but as academics, we kind of suck at talking to people outside of our little tiny silo. And I think it's been, amazing talking to you and Jose and Corey, and just learning just new words and new ways of thinking about things. And I would hope more people, there's no excuse not to do it and not to start working across silos.
Absolutely.
I thought the reason we don't talk to other people is we don't like anyone. That's what you told me.
It's easy to do. That is not like anyone.
Actually, one of the applications of our collaboration in sports neuroscience had to do with testing. I want you to explain what termed the Warrior-Worrier Gene. And we tested fighters, we tested athletic controls, and then we just had, I think, sedentary people. First, explain the genetics of the warrior versus worrier gene and why people in high-risk sports, be it fighting, it could be big wave surfing, it could be rock climbing. What is different about their behavior versus someone who would be more in the worrier class of the genotype?
Yeah, and again, why people should talk to each other across different fields. So this is I don't know if you know that story, Tony. So basically, it's like I was studying a gene in my lab, and as you would call them, sedentary people, and I would just call them research participants. And it's a gene called the Warrior/Worrier gene, and I was talking to Corey about it, and he's like, he got really confused because he was like, okay, so you tested this in warriors. I'm like, no, just regular people. He's like, then how do you call it the warrior gene? I'm like, oh. So we did, like, we tested it, and it was, I think, the first time that gene has been tested in like MMA fighters. But it's a really interesting gene polymorphism because it's the COMT gene, right, produces an enzyme, right? So enzyme, breaks down different molecules. So this particular enzyme breaks down dopamine. So in other areas of your brain, you have a different mechanism to get rid of dopamine, right? A dopamine transporter. In your frontal lobe, you mostly rely on this enzyme to break down dopamine. So if you have one version of it, the enzyme doesn't work very well, you're not breaking down dopamine as efficiently. And if you have the other version, right, you carry the other allele, you are breaking down a lot of dopamine, right? So we have one set of people that have ostensibly, right, lots of dopamine at rest, and another set of people that have less in their prefrontal cortex. So what we and other people find is that at rest, it's great. You want to have more dopamine, and we've shown this in other studies with women. They're less stressed, right? They feel better. They're like, cool, everything's awesome. Except when you get stressed, right? When you add stress to the mix, that's also going to flood more dopamine into the prefrontal lobe. And it turns out that that's not good because a lot of biology kind of works on an inverted U. So you want to be in that kind of Goldilocks zone of dopamine. So those people that were doing great in the Goldilocks zone at rest, now we push them over and they can't really function well under like high stress environment. They're not able to do those things we need our frontal lobe to, like attention and thinking and processing. But then the other group, where they were kind of on the other end of that inverted U, they had low dopamine at rest. But now we give them stress and they're in the Goldilocks zone. So they almost are in this situation where under stress, they get kind of optimal dopamine levels and they're performing amazingly, right? So they're able to think better, right? Their processing is better, their attention is better. And so these are the warriors, right? They perform much better under stress.
Now, is there a sex difference regarding this? And I only ask that because it's almost always guys that do some of these crazy physical feats. I mean, if you look at big wave surfing, it's all guys. If you look at rock climbing, free solo climbing, it's pretty much mostly guys. And the fight sport, obviously women are coming into the fight sport, but it's still mostly guys who say, I want to fight. So is there some sexual dimorphism there?
Yeah, men. Well, we could talk about men for days.
We need to get Val in that conversation.
There is a sex difference in the sense that women have more dopaminergic projections going into their frontal lobes, about 30% more relative to men. So it could be, but with men, with that risk-taking behavior, you know, we tend to look more at testosterone, especially in young people, because there is kind of a really close correlation between traumatic brain injury and when men have peak testosterone levels.
Interesting.
There's a reason I pay $800 a month for my son's car insurance.
It's
I believe
Insurance company, they know statistics.
Whoa, 800, that's a lot. Holy
I
crap.
know, I need to talk to you. I don't know what I'm doing wrong.
Oh my.
I'm probably
You know,
going to
one thing in defense of women and risk taking, doing like 3 aerials in midair and landing on a 4-inch balance beam to me is kind of risk taking. So kudos to the ladies in gymnastics out there.
Yeah.
You know, that's pretty high risk in my view.
Yeah, I mean, you at the same time, you want to have fear, right? Because you know, the one of these people who does these free solo climbs, we put him in an MRI machine, his amygdala isn't lighting up. So fear is it keeps us alive. Right? Some of these people, their fear responses aren't healthy either. You want to have a sort of right level that, and you know, with the people with anxiety, it's sort of fear run amok. But the other end,
the muted amygdala is not all that good either.
That's when you get head injuries. So I think there's a host of things like just individual differences in amygdala responsivity, you know, testosterone levels, testosterone with cortisol, you know, potentially that, you know, COMT factor.
Interesting. So with the amygdala response, I assume there are people on the other side of that where they're in constant fear, like everything scares the crap
I mean,
out
that's anxiety. That's generalized anxiety. I mean, that's really what it is. It's fear kind of gone haywire.
Boy, what a crappy way to live.
I know. You don't think I've ever felt anxiety in your life.
He's more laid back. He's like as laid back as an area rug on Valium.
Okay. For whatever reason, I can compartmentalize everything and I can like put it in a block and not worry about it. And then when I got to worry about it, I can get that block. But otherwise, I tell people my brain is either hyper focused, which is 5% of the time, and then unfocused, which is 95%. So this is like part of the 5% that I'm talking to 2 people.
You get a lot done in 5%. I got to give you some credit.
All right, we don't want to hold you too long, Jamie, but summarize some of the current and past projects that we've collaborated on. I know. How about this? We have some upcoming projects that the 3 of us will be collaborating on. Tell the audience a little bit about that to show how exercise science and neuroscience can, you know, form really cool partnership.
Yeah, there's one I'm writing the IRB for now that I talked to Jose. I talked to you and Tony about. So we're gonna bring a large group of untrained individuals, sedentary, if you will, into the lab.
Wait, before you move on, I think this is kind of a funny story. I think way back when I had asked you if you could why some of these papers in psychology and neuroscience never describe the subjects. Like I didn't know how tall they were. I didn't know how much they weighed. And I'm like, isn't that basic stuff? And you said, well, no, we don't really describe them that way. And I said, that's the first thing I look for is what their sort of body composition, but it's not part of your field. And explain why it's not. And now you have a different understanding of, you know, the physical characteristics of human subjects and whether they're trained or untrained. I
think in most labs, I mean, I'm weird since being a neuroscientist that studies humans is a little bit awkward, but usually when we bring people in a lab, sort of standard is to get their demographic information, which to us is, you know, sex, age, race, whether or not they're Hispanic. Right. You ask based like when was the last time you had your menstrual cycle? Because if we look at hormones, that matters. But it's not really on our radar to look at body composition, height and weight, Now we do, right? Now I have an in-body
Right.
machine now, and I've convinced that, people in my floor do. And so, I mean, I think it's through conversations like that we change the field and starting to look at basic body comp. Which
Right.
I don't know the reason. It just, people don't generally do it. I guess
Well,
it's
it's good. I always say it's good to know, and I don't know what you tell your students, but I always say one of the first things when I read a research paper is I look at the description of the subjects. Number one, are they trained or untrained? As you know, I have this bias against untrained, i.e. sedentary people. I want to know if they're trained or untrained. That's number one. And number two, if they are trained, I want to know what their body composition is, because it tells you a story about how much they train. Like if someone says, we have a group of runners who, whatever, moderately trained runners, the first thing I look at is, well, what's their max VO2 and what's their body composition? And I can tell just from that if they're serious runners or jolly joggers. So in our field, that's important. I want to know if they're jolly exercisers or serious exercisers. And but anyways, I didn't mean to interrupt your story. Actually, I kind of did mean to interrupt it, but I'll let you resume.
Well, I mean, it's an interesting study. My son's actually going to help with that too, which just makes me kind of excited. Maybe he'll be a neurosport person one day. We are going to just general idea. Can a short exercise bout give you a little bit of immune protection? We know weird things like if you get a little stressed, right, you release some of these, immune factors peripherally. So we're just going to put people on the treadmill. We're going to sort of a two-part study. One part is we're going to look at some of these immune factors and just see like, what does CRP do? What does IL-6 do? What is cortisol doing in untrained individuals? And then the second part of it is we're working with one of our colleagues that you work with, Dr. Jonathan Banks, and we're just going to look at some of these basic cognitive changes and see can a short exercise bout and somebody who's completely untrained, if we push them to sort of max exertion, can we get changes in attention for good or bad? But we're pretty excited to work to basically take a population of untrained people and give them the experience that your participants tend to get, and then just see, do we get some, because it would be kind of cool to say, like, go for a 30-minute jog before you get on, a couple hours before you get on a plane, and maybe you'll have some immune protection.
Now, how hard will this exercise be?
I think, Tony, we had talked about doing the exercise, which one? The exercise to exhaustion, 85% max.
Yeah, which is, that's pretty intense for the untrained, right? I mean, so it'll be interesting to see, because it probably is going, the response obviously would differ in the trained and untrained, but in this particular case, we're concerned about if there's an immunoprotective effect. I think we got to go back, just to look back and forth a little bit more on what the optimal intensity is. The pre-existing data might say in the trained athlete that probably 60%, somewhere in the range of 50 to 65% is going to be immunoprotective. 85% in a short bout may do that. However, 85-90% over a sustained period of time might actually do the reverse, right?
Tony's going to stand behind them when they're not the treadmill, like
Yeah, 85-90%, they're busting ass.
They are, yeah, that's high, really is. So there's a couple of things, we have a couple of options here, and I think we're refining that right now, and to look at what would be the optimal in the untrained, because some of that data that does exist is in the trained athlete, or in the triathlete, or in the individual who's running 1 or 2 marathons a month, and then we know we're actually seeing immunosuppression in some cases for 1 to 2 weeks subsequent because of that high intensity. So yeah, we're going to refine that range, but this is going to be really neat. I think it'll hold high value too for those. I think we're going to, my guess is we're going to find just another reason why the subjects that are untrained should be doing some form of physical activity.
Oh, well, then they might actually be trained after the study, right? Because they'll be running all the time. Okay, I have just a couple more questions, and then we could wrap up. And I'm going to address this to both of you because I want you guys to speculate. Are you ready?
I was born ready, baby.
We know exercise is good for the brain. It helps cognition, et cetera, as you age. If you had to choose one form of exercise, would it be aerobic exercise or resistance training? And your entire goal is just to help cognitive function. Which would you choose and why? And obviously, this is purely speculative, but which would you choose?
And we can't do both.
Can't do both.
I would go with aerobic. Maybe Tony would go with resistance.
No way. I hate weight training. I would go with aerobic with some type of cognitive challenge.
You're cheating. He said you can't do that. He said just aerobic or RT. You can't.
Oh, well, hold on. I'm talking about you can do aerobic with a little bit of a challenge to it. I mean, how about
Like hill running, hill sprints, like that?
I would say aerobic exercise outside, so you get that adaptive capacity going.
Okay, but my point is this: if you're cross-country skiing and you never cross-country skied before, but you can do it at a low enough intensity, that's also cognitively challenging.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I see what you're saying. You want to cognitively challenge.
Something where you have to think a little bit. I'm not talking about, just something that's a little bit beyond. I'm jogging. You got to think a little bit while you're doing it. That's all.
Yeah. Outside of
some of those factors that we know help the brain. There's evidence, with the exception of osteocalcin, I think there's the evidence to suggest that they're better released with more intense exercise in small bouts here and there. But I agree with Tony that we also see that if you can exercise in more naturalistic environments, like if you're jogging on a trail in the mountains, that seems to be more cognitively stimulating than jogging on a treadmill, and it does seem to help with some of those functions better.
So paddling in the water, that's cognitively challenging.
That's a good one. Exactly. That's a good example, actually. You need a little balance. You got to look ahead. You got to watch for alligators here, So that's my point. Yeah, that's going to do a little more than just plain old, everything's safe, and I'm going to jog for 20 minutes on a treadmill.
I did see an alligator a week or so ago as I was paddling. That gets your epinephrine going. Like, oh, geez, it's an alligator. Okay, let's. I want to wrap this up. Dr. Tartar, tell the audience why everyone needs to go to the Neurosports conference in February, and who the keynote speaker is.
We have two keynote speakers this year. So we have Dr. Ralph Stefan on Friday, and he's the head of the football players health study at Harvard. And he's going to come talk about head injury and CTE and his experience working with some of these NFL players that have had a lot of head injuries and what he thinks about it. It's going to be super interesting. He's an amazing speaker. And then on Saturday, we're going to have Dr. Nancy Klimas, who runs Institute for Neuroimmune Medicine. And she uses exercise in kind of an interesting way. So she uses exercise in her patients who are immunocompromised. So she's going to come talk about sort of flipping it and reversing it. How she can use exercise as a way of getting inflammation responses and otherwise. She does work with Parkinson's, Gulf War illness, chronic fatigue. But I mean, all the talks, I think I'm every year it's good, but this year, there's one talk that's going to be, he's going to talk about getting people to cycle in an MRI and what the brain looks like.
Well, that's cool.
And then another talk, our friend Bigliassi is going to talk about is it supposed to hurt, pain during exercise? It just, every single talk is fascinating. I'm super excited about them.
I'd like to know if there is pain-free exercise, Tony.
It's a teaser. His title is a teaser.
We're all going to make a lot of money if there is. I'll tell you that. But if he can help us find that, the way to approach that without any pain, or actually even without any effort, we're going to make good money.
Awesome. Well, Jamie, thank you for your time. That was a wonderful show, and